not for blackmail Israel. Buy me, Jaime. Welcome to AntiTribe, the Freakin' Weekend. Our topics tonight are female sex predators, he-she Minnesota Thang, Bussey Bussin, and moral relativism. As always, we're brought to you by the bank that helps keep traffic moving, with pizza and jerky on the way for tonight's ball party. That's JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank. Starring Dr. John DeMartini, Finky, Ronnie Zionism, Talmudic Judaism, Kabbalah, and other forms of ethno-supremacist ideology. I'm for sale, not for blackmail Israel. Buy me, Jaime.
Welcome to our live stream. This is AntiTribe's A Freakin' Weekend, Episode 2. And I am your host, Goel, of Investigations in Ritual Abuse, AntiTribe, Fringe Concerns, Government Sex Predators, and Church Predators. And we got a good show queued up for you this week. Up in my upper left-hand corner, you see a picture of a very pompous man named John DeMartini. He's a human behavior specialist, whatever the hell that is. And he's been making the rounds of late. He appeared on Aubrey Marcus's podcast and made a number of statements on that podcast that went viral. We're going to review some of those clips from the Aubrey Marcus podcast. For those of you who don't know, Aubrey Marcus is the founder of On It, a supplement company, I believe based out of Texas. Joe Rogan uses a lot of their stuff and endorses many of their products. So ultimately, John DeMartini went on Aubrey Marcus's podcast and he discussed the nature of evil. He contended that there was no evil in the world, that Christ was a reconciliation of opposites, good and evil, embodied in one individual, and that there were upsides to child murder. We're also going to be examining a former therapist out of Long Island, New York, Renee Holberman, otherwise known as Renee Holman. And we're going to be examining some statements that were made, some rather extraordinary statements that were made by Minnesota transgender lawmaker Leigh Fink. And we're going to talk about Phil and Kathy Bussey, the former mission presidents out of Madrid. And, of course, we'll have a few satirical commercials in there, as we are known to do. So I'd like to thank our sponsors, MAPS, that is Minor Attracted Persons for Utah. One of the commercials that we're going to be doing or playing here shortly is MAPS for Utah. Abigail Marie Ross Consulting came up with it. Of course, you all know that this is satirical, but for those of you who don't, I think you're going to enjoy the commercial that we have coming up for that. And then, of course, we're going to have Pickleballin' with Gordon Bowen. That's the second commercial that we're going to be playing tonight. And, of course, we'll have some other matters as well. But the first thing I want to jump into is this John DeMartini clip from Aubrey Marcus's podcast on YouTube of late, a couple of weeks back. You may have seen some of these clips in your Facebook Reels or your Instagram Reels. They went pretty viral. But we're going to be reviewing John DeMartini and his view that there is no such thing as evil. And, of course, Aubrey Marcus's reaction to it. So without further ado...
So you don't believe in any universal ethics, any universal values where, like, child abuse is always bad?
Don't know, because what is child abuse? That's the thing. What we would call child abuse here in America...
Having sex with a 5-year-old.
Well, I've seen brothers and sisters have incest in a bathtub and having sex with each other and playing with each other.
I'm talking about an adult having sex with a 5-year-old.
Well, that's not my preference. That's not something that I have experienced in my life, but I don't know what...
Now, real quickly, notice that Aubrey Marcus doesn't go into... He doesn't ask a follow-up question about seeing 5-year-olds in a bathtub having sex with each other. incestuous sex. He lets that slide, as you do. I think he was so shocked by the opening part of it that John D. Martini didn't automatically come out against having sex with a 5-year-old. He tried to put it in the context of two siblings having sex in a bathtub together at 5 years of age. That I think it just kind of, I think a lot of this interview made Aubrey Marcus uncomfortable, I think visibly uncomfortable, as it would any normal person. But of course, you have someone like John D. Martini, who I wrote about on IRA this past week. I wrote about this exact clip and how it fit in the context of the Hamlin case. So just that little bit of punctuation there, I want to point out that when John D. Martini said that, Aubrey Marcus didn't follow up. And I think that was a little bit of a mistake, but also attributable to kind of like just being shocked that this guy would go there as opposed to automatically condemning having sex with a 5-year-old as being evil.
Going on, after working with about 1,300 cases of pedophilia that I've gotten to work with, both sides of the equation, I find out that many times the people that are the pedophiles were either slammed and punished for masturbation or punished in a very young dealing with sexuality, and that little boy or little girl that's in that age is still inside that adult, and that little boy is now being attracted.
To be fair, I don't think any of us have a problem with that little boy or little girl who was punished for being sexually inappropriate as a child by their parents. We're trying to instill appropriate versus inappropriate behaviors in them, or at least a sense of what's appropriate versus inappropriate. None of us have a problem with that child still being inside of that adult. What we have a problem with is that adult being inside of a child. That's why we have laws against pedophilia and child rape. So that's my 2 cents. Let's get back to the clip, shall we?
To the little girl at the same age. I'll give you a real case. I worked with a gentleman who was from Japan who'd been 8 years in prison for pedophilia. A psychologist over there asked me to work with him. They were in the room with him, and his mother caught him masturbating when he was 8.5 years old. She beat him nearly to a pulp.
But that's okay because that was just her value system, right?
Well, she had a husband that had a high sex drive and was looking at porn, and when she saw her son begin to do that, she lost it. The anger.
So I'm going to stop the clip right there. Aubrey Marcus is talking about universal values of good and evil, and John D. Martini is talking about context, and those two things don't go together very more often than not, but they kind of do here, because let's talk about what John D. Martini just said. Let's talk about how he said this 8.5-year-old boy learned the behavior of masturbating from his father, who was, obsessed with pornography. And, of course, the mother, who probably was sexually neglected, as most wives of porn addicts are, saw her son starting to emulate his father's behavior, and rather than doing what a normal, psychologically healthy mother would do, which was to sit her son down and talk about that, she took the frustrations that she had with his father out on him and beat him to a pulp, but also she didn't remove him from the situation. So shout out to the mom of this individual who, like so many other moms, doesn't recognize the damage that having a father figure in the home who's addicted to pornography and addicted to sexual deviancy is going to inflict on a child, because this 8.5-year-old boy grew up to be a pedophile who did 8 years in Japanese prison for raping kids. So all of these men out here who want to sit here and say that pornography is not a gateway towards deviancy, is not a problem in their lives, and not a problem in the lives of their kids who are being exposed to it, I got news for you. It is. And this is something that John D. Martini doesn't seem to get, is the link between that child learning deviancy from his father and his adult behavior as a child rapist who was having sex with children and ultimately went to prison for it. He doesn't get that link at all. What he does is he attributes the mother beating this 8.5-year-old boy for being sexually inappropriate, probably for looking at porn while he was masturbating. That's the problem. Not the father exposing his 8-year-old son to porn, but the mother beating her son's ass for being sexually inappropriate. So let's get back to that clip.
She had to her husband got taken out on the child, and the husband was more assertive and more powerful, so she couldn't take out her anger on him, so she took it out on the child.
So that's okay?
I'm not making it. I'm just trying to give
It's not okay.
Again, he's not making a value judgment. John DeMartini, like a lot of other people in this position, they don't want to make a value judgment. They don't want to condemn the behavior. They want to focus on the context. First off, it's not okay for a father to expose his 8.5-year-old son to pornography to the point where the son becomes a chronic masturbator, thereby requiring the mother to do what the father should have done, which is correct his inappropriate behavior. Second, it's not appropriate for the father to not lead in his household, to not present a healthy and appropriate version of masculinity. It's inappropriate for the mom to beat her son to a pulp. It is appropriate for her to correct the son, but when the father isn't doing his job, well, guess what? It ultimately comes back to that male figure in the household abdicating his responsibilities as a husband and a father. That's where you see a lot of these sex offenders emerging in adulthood, is from these sorts of situations, these sorts of home dynamics, these sorts of family dynamics. So let's continue watching the clip.
It's just fundamentally it's not okay to beat a child to a pulp. It's not okay to sexually assault a child. It's not okay to murder people wantonly.
So it's not okay to beat a child to a pulp. It's not okay to sexually assault a child, but the fact that what's unspoken here is that this father exposed his child to pornography. It's the reason this child's life is the way that it is an adult. He's a convicted rapist who did 8 years in prison, who was having sex with children. None of this is okay. But ultimately what goes left unsaid here is a condemnation of pornography. That is, exposing a child to pornography and the link that might have towards that child growing up to being a child predator as an adult. That goes left unexamined by both Aubrey Marcus and John DeMartini. Instead, the focus here is the mother disciplined the child for masturbating and for being a deviant, for exhibiting inappropriate behavior that he saw his own father modeling. That's what John DeMartini assigns the origins of this individual's pedophilia and child rape to. The mother disciplining him excessively. So, let's go on with the rest of the clip.
There's something actually fundamental inside of us that is actually on a driving force towards life, love, freedom, the experience to live this beautiful world. And if somebody is intentionally interfering with that, we have an obligation, we have an obligation to try and prevent or stop that.
Well, all I know is that the gentleman grew up, to continue my point that I'm making, at 8.5 years old, all the girls that he targeted for pedophilia were at 8.5, even though he went up to 33 years old. Now, some of the girls were meeting him in a dressing room at a mall and having multiple sex with him. These are 8.5-year-old girls having sex multiple times with him.
So let's unpack what John DeMartini just said. He's talking about these 8.5-year-old girls who were groomed by this adult pedophile to meet him in a mall and to have sex with him in a changing room or a bathroom stall or wherever the setting was. I don't really think the setting's all that important, but ultimately John DeMartini is trying to characterize these 8.5-year-old girls as being somehow voluntary participants in their child rapes. Now, one of the reasons we have laws on the books in virtually every developed, industrialized country is that we recognize that children lack the cognitive capacity to understand what they're doing in terms of sex with an adult. And therefore, they're not as culpable. It's not their fault. Here you have an adult who is manipulating 8.5-year-old girls to meet with him in the mall and have sex with him. That's what this is. It's not these 8.5-year-old girls are just meeting with him voluntarily and volitionally and having sex. They're engaged in behavior that they don't understand the implications of by a much older man who does understand the implications and does know that what he is doing is illegal.
So I'm not interested in the morality here. I'm interested in the why do people do what they do?
Again, he's not interested in the morality here. Because why would you be? Why would you be interested in the moral implications of a father exposing his 8.5-year-old son to pornography, that son acting out, and the mother of that 8.5-year-old son disciplining him for it? Admittedly, according to DeMartini, excessively, she beat him to a pulp. But the moral implications here are the only implications that matter. Mothers and fathers are supposed to model appropriate behavior for their children. They're not supposed to be exposing 8.5-year-old children to pornography, and they're not supposed to be physically assaulting their child for something that his father does. That should play no role in it. The appropriate response here is for the mother to remove the child from what is an inappropriate situation and to have healthier male role models. Ideally, she wouldn't have a child with such a caliber of individual at all. It's what I'd say to any single woman out there. If the man you're considering for a relationship views pornography, he is not suitable for a relationship. He's just not. And you're always going to be in competition with pornography for sexual intimacy and attention. And therefore, you should just ditch him because he's a loser. At the end of the day, this is what it produces. It produces an 8.5-year-old who grows up to be a child rapist, who grows up probably to neglect the women that he's in a relationship with, and possibly only gets into a relationship with those women so that he can access their children. Because that's what these predators do. They get in relationships with women who are divorced so that they can have access to their young children. So let's finish the rest of the clip.
What is it that drives these behaviors? Because if you just make it black and white and you don't look deeper, you assume that that's bad and good, and you never get to understand why that's happening.
No, I don't assume it. I actually know it. I actually know it in my body. Like I think, and I think this is actually a common sense sacred axiom. If you see somebody abusing somebody innocently, that's wrong.
Well,
Like, I think we all understand what's going on here and what the causal relationship is. I think we know. Here's a father who's exposing his prepubescent child to pornography, and the reason the moral implications are valid as a consideration here, the reason you should focus on the moral implications primarily, is because morality it gives us a framework in which to confine our behavior. That's the entire purpose of morality, is to give us a framework for appropriate versus inappropriate behavior so that you don't turn an 8.5-year-old boy into a future pedophile. That's the reality of it here. Your wife isn't so beside herself with you as a husband and a father because of your pornography issues that she takes out her angst towards you and her emotional upset towards your behavior on your 8.5-year-old son, when he emulates you. She rightly recognizes you're the one that's at fault, if she has a moral framework from which to proceed. That's why the morality is central to why this happens. It's also why John DeMartini is absolutely wrong. But of course, DeMartini goes on to say in his future clip here that I'm about to roll here in a second that there are upsides to child murder. And that apparently is a bridge too far for Aubrey Marcus, who almost terminates the interview. So let's get that clip up for you.
Well, what happens when that ends up in a fatality? Someone murders a child.
Yes.
Like they don't have the
I've
opportunity
gotten to
to
work
be
with
great.
that.
They don't you haven't gotten to work with the murdered child.
I have, not the murdered child, but the family that's
Well,
left
that's
over
what I'm
with it.
talking about. Like the murdered child doesn't have a chance to be grateful for being murdered.
I don't know what's going on in the psychology of the murdered child. Because I didn't get to work with a little murdered child. But I do know I get to work with the family, and I get to watch the dynamics in the family and how it shifts and watch the upsides to that event. Because to say it's just an evil event and there's no benefits to it is very narrowed. The reality is that there's upsides to that event. I worked with a lady after the big event.
There's upsides to the murder of children?
Yes.
So that's a stunning statement. There's upsides to the murder of children. There are benefits to the murder of children. Now, if you want to know where the social issues and the social ills that affect our society come from, they come from this sort of staggering, amoral worldview that people like Dr. John DeMartini express on podcasts like this. On IRA this past week, I talked about C. Terry Warner, Dr. John DeMartini, so on and so forth, in an article, and I presented specific examples from the Hamblin victim statements, in which Hamblin and James Warren Mooney and others in their group, the Church of Satan Ericlavia Native American Church, were telling Rachel E. Hamblin that she had beguiled men her entire life, that she had invited them to molest her, because ultimately it's what's in your own body that invites or attracts these child predators to abuse you. That's the reality of it. So Dr. John DeMartini here is so blissfully unaware of how disconnected from conventional morality he is, how disconnected from the baseline he is, that he thinks he's making a sophisticated argument that there's an upside to child murder. The reality of it is that normal people don't make such arguments, and most of us are capable of understanding that, and also capable of saying to someone like Dr. John DeMartini, look, we're not having this discussion with you. Certain things are so far out of bounds, and you're going to see that in Aubrey Marcus's reaction here in a second. So I'm going to turn my mic off so you can hear the clip, not me.
There's upsides to it.
I think we're going to have to stop here, John.
I think we're going to have to stop here, John. That's what Aubrey Marcus's reaction was. He almost terminated the entire interview at that juncture. So when you're a normal individual, which Aubrey Marcus is more or less within the spectrum of what we would consider normal, and you encounter somebody like Dr. John DeMartini, who makes the argument there is no such thing as evil, and there are upsides to child murder. He doesn't draw the line from an 8.5-year-old child being exposed to pornography and degeneracy in his youth by his father to that child later growing up to becoming a child rapist who meets 8.5-year-old girls at the mall to have sex with them. On some level, John DeMartini thinks, hey, that is, those 8.5-year-old girls were voluntarily meeting him for sex multiple times. It's an absolutely stunning interview, and I would encourage any of you to watch it from start to finish, because it is absolutely illustrative of what we're up against. It's illustrative of the conceit that we're up against with this Epstein Files release, and also the cultural conceits of people in our entertainment industry, in our arts and entertainment industry, in our news media. All of those people hold norms and mores that are much closer to Dr. John DeMartini in those clips than they are to Aubrey Marcus or you or me. And that's kind of the issue that we're faced with here. Like, if you want to ask yourself how somebody like David Lee Hamlin could walk free for 30-plus years raping and torturing children and adults alike, here's your sign. Here is your sign. It's because of people like Dr. John DeMartini. Like, you can see him up here. You can see him in these clips that I just played you from his most recent appearance on the Aubrey Marcus podcast. And you can see exactly what we're up against in terms of overcoming a 3% conviction rate, under 3% conviction rate. So out of 1,000 sexual assault reports, 50 will result, or, 310 will be reported. 50 will result in an arrest. 28 will result in an incarceration. And 28 will result in a conviction. 25 will result in an incarceration. So that's 2.5%. Basically, 97.5% of people who sexually assault others go free. You have to try for numbers that bad. And what I submit to you is the purpose of a system is what it does. That's a Hoyerism by Stafford Beers, I believe his name was. The purpose of a system is what it does, not what it fails to do. It's a theme that IRA has employed repeatedly over the past 40 years to make the point that the purpose of the system is the 2.5% incarceration rate. It's the 2.8, 2.97% conviction rate for child rape. Like, for rape in general, it's under 3%. So 97 out of 100 rapists are going scot-free. And it's actually worse than that because, like I said, out of 1,000 sexual assaults, only 310 will be reported. That means that for, 690 are going to be unreported. That's according to the FBI statistics on RAINN, their website. I mean, you can look it up. At the end of the day, the reason for that is directly attributable to the fact that we've gotten away from conventional morality. We're not hung up on the morality of these things. We're hung up on the causes. Well, the cause is because you don't have any morality. You don't have any moral foundation in the home. You don't have any moral foundation in relationships. You have people who think that their marriages are a piece of paper. And I went and I got a license down at the courthouse or the clerk's office to get married, and that's what it is. It's a piece of paper. Marriage is a covenant between two people and God. It is a husband and a wife who are committed in the sacrament of marriage to forming a family, to growing together in intimacy and closeness. That's what sex is for. Not just for procreation, but also for enjoyment and to alleviate temptation. And you have to invest a lot in to create the conditions for sex. And these men who are out here looking at pornography, just like that child predator that John DeMartini treated in the first clip that we played, they're investing their time into watching another man have sex online or in magazines. They're not investing their time in their wife and their children. They're not investing their time in self-improvement. Someone's priorities by how they spend their time, how they invest their time, because time is the finite resource that we all have a limited amount of. If we're lucky, we get 70 summers, 70 winters, 70 falls, 70 springs. We get 70. And once that time is gone, it's over. You don't get to reclaim it. So you know what your priorities are in this world by how you invest your time and who you invest your time in. And if you're a husband, you're supposed to invest your time in your wife and your children. If you're a wife, you're supposed to invest your time in your husband and in your children. Morality tells us that. Morality tells us that a husband's job is to love his wife and give himself for his wife the way Christ loved and gave himself for the church. That your life as a man is to be sacrificed for your wife, for your children. Like, you live and you sacrifice your time and your life, the finite time that you have, so that they might live beyond you. They might live more abundantly through you, just as Christ sacrificed himself so that we could all have eternal life. That's the purpose of morality. That's the purpose of Christ's example. It's actually very practical. It's not mystical. It's not esoteric. It's very simple and straightforward. And morality gives us a framework for our behavior to where we don't expose our 8.5-year-old boy or 8.5-year-old son to pornography because we're watching it. We don't model masturbation for him to pornography so that his mother catches him, and his mother, who's sexually frustrated, neglected, and being dismissed by you as a husband, loses her shit and beats your kid out of frustration with you because she doesn't want her son to grow up to be like his father. But ultimately, that son, that Japanese son, grew up to be a child predator who did 8 years in prison for raping 8.5-year-old girls. And neither John DeMartini nor Aubrey Marcus seem to draw the connection between a porn-viewing father modeling that kind of behavior for his 8.5-year-old son and the 8.5-year-old son growing up to be an adult predator. Nobody seemed to draw that connection. Because ultimately, in our society, pornography has become normalized. And what I'm saying to you is pornography comes at the expense of time, and time is your finite resource. That's the big issue. If you're watching pornography, you're not improving yourself. You're not attracting a mate. If you have a mate, you're neglecting your mate and your child to watch porn, to watch another man have sex. I mean, Ron White has a routine about this. We're all gay. It's just a question of how much. He was talking to his friend who watched porn and said he wasn't gay. And Ron White's punchline was, when you watch porn, do you watch guys with small penises? He's like, no, I like big, juicy, hard, throbbing. I did not know that about myself. It's gay. Like, if you say you're a heterosexual man, you're watching another man getting it on with a woman as opposed to having sex with your own wife, you're gay. Like, it's just that simple. A lot of people who consider it juvenile to put it that way, or puerile or whatever, I don't really care. Like, at the end of the day, we are in a moral crisis. We're not in a practical crisis. Before morality, we're in a moral crisis. Morality shapes our behavior and our conduct in such a way that we automatically know we need to invest our time in our wife, our children, the people around us who actually mean something, like our friends and our family. We shouldn't be investing our time in pornography or in celebrity news or in any number of the other things that serve as a distraction from our responsibilities. that's what morality is. It's a practical roadmap to life. Speaking of practical roadmaps to life, I'd like to take this moment to give you a quick word from our sponsors, Maps for Utah. They've come out and they've endorsed Jabez Stewart Adams, Senate's president in Utah, and Senator Todd Weiler of Woods Cross in their presumptive campaign for governor and lieutenant governor in 2028. And without further ado, I'd like to just play that ad for you.
Utah minor attracted persons and adult attracted minors. Our liberties are under attack, and in these trying times, it is vital that we stand with those who have stood with us. That's why we at Maps for Utah are standing with Stewart Adams and Todd Weiler in their campaign for Utah governor and lieutenant governor in 2028. It's never too early to get behind the men who got behind us. Todd Weiler understood that child sex trafficking shouldn't be an offense that would result in a lifetime on the sex offender registry. He courageously sponsored legislation to shorten that time to just 10 years as a first step. Stewart Adams effectively lowered the age of consent to just 13 years old when his granddaughter Abigail Marie Ross was facing child rape charges for having sex with a 13-year-old twice. Our heritage and traditions are under attack in Utah, and our founders knew from their priesthood wisdom that a 13-year-old girl ought to be able to marry a 50-year-old man if she was in love with him, because love always wins. In 2028, vote Adams and Weiler for governor and lieutenant governor, and restore Utah's heritage and liberty for minor attracted persons and adult attracted minors. Paid for by Maps for Utah. I'm Abigail Marie Ross, and I approve this message.
So there you have it, Maps for Utah, and their inaugural 2028 gubernatorial ad on behalf of Jabez Stewart Adams, Senate President for the Utah Senate, and Senator Todd Weiler of Woods Cross, who actually sponsored legislation to lower the time one would spend on the sex registry from a lifetime for sex trafficking to just 10 years. Because, that kind of horrible crime should not be a lifetime sentence. I mean, it is for the victim, but it shouldn't be for the perpetrator. It's just too much to have his name on a list so that the public can be warned about the fact that he's a threat to children or a threat to adults. So speaking of priorities, there's your sign that your elected representatives in Utah, particularly Todd Weiler of Woods Cross, Utah, his priority was to make sure that the penalty wasn't too stiff for sex offenders. That they would spend 10 years in the sex offender registry for certain crimes, as opposed to a lifetime, even though, of course, their victims serve a lifetime sentence with the trauma and the pain that, sexual abuse causes. Again, out of 1,000 sexual assault reports annually in the United States, 50 will result in an arrest, 28 will result in a conviction, and 25 will result in incarceration. That's 2.5%. 97.5% of those guys go free, as they don't serve a day of jail time. And Todd Weiler feels that they should serve even less, or they should endure even less of a consequence. And, of course, speaking of J. Stewart Adams, the reason he's in that ad, the reason I mentioned Abigail Marie Ross is because she's his step-granddaughter. And while she was a senior in high school, she was having sex with a 13-year-old boy. And she was facing a potential lifetime sentence as a result of her actions. J. Stewart Adams obviously did not feel that that was appropriate. It's too heavy of a sentence. And so he enlisted his friend Senator Kurt Cullimore, to sponsor legislation that would allow someone who was 18 to receive the reduced sentence available under the law for someone who was 17 and had sex with a 13-year-old. He sponsored legislation that would allow an 18-year-old who was still in high school but was having sex with a 13-year-old to have a lesser sentence. That's the reality of Utah. That's the priority. That bill passed both houses of the Utah legislature. It was signed by Governor Spencer Cox. Unfortunately, for Abigail Marie Ross, it didn't apply retroactively, but of course, it did apply retroactively. The judge in her case sentenced her to time served. She was not forced to register on a sex offender registry. She got community service and parole, like probation, basically. As you do when you're 18 and you have sex with a 13-year-old boy. Now, if the roles had been reversed and she had been a 13-year-old granddaughter of J. Stewart Adams and an 18-year-old boy had sex with her, I doubt that Adams would have enlisted or said anything to Kurt Quillamore about this, about changing the law. It did effectively apply retroactively to let his granddaughter off the hook. His granddaughter's name is Abigail Marie Ross. We published that on IRA. We were able to narrow it down through a court record search and find out exactly who was at fault and verify that it was Abigail Marie Ross, who had sex with a 13-year-old boy when she was 18. Sexually, that's child rape under the law in Utah. And of course, her father being the Senate president, or her grandfather being the Senate president, worked out pretty well for her. He got his friends like Kurt Quillamore to rewrite the law. The judge applied it retroactively, and guess who her attorney was? Cara Tangaro, the same woman who represented David Lee Hamlin's ex-wife, Roselle Stevenson. You really can't make it up. You really can't make it up. And so the next thing that I want to highlight in this week's episode of the Freakin Weekend are the female sex predators. That is, the female sex predators like this next lady I'm about to pull up, Renee Holberman. So let's transition that over real quick. So we've got Renee Holberman. You should be seeing her photograph. She worked in a daycare of all places. Now, she's a licensed clinical social worker with a degree from Adelphi University. She worked in various parts of the New York metropolitan area and Long Island, as well as Allentown, Pennsylvania. And then she was busted by federal authorities for possessing child pornography and disseminating it. This is her LinkedIn. So you can see the various places that she's worked at. You can see the various places on her LinkedIn that demonstrate she worked in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She was counseling children. She was a social worker for Heartfire Psychology. No longer is, hopefully. She was a social worker for Life Stance Health. And, of course, she was a case coordinator at a veteran's home. Those are three employers that she listed on her LinkedIn. And then, of course, here's Renee Holberman's criminal complaint. And I want you to understand something here really quickly as we read this. This is going to be graphic. This is going to be disturbing. And there's just no way around it. So, without further ado, I'm going to transition over, and you're going to see that complaint pop up. On October 23rd, 2024, the defendant, Renee Holberman, also known as Rena, waived her Miranda rights and agreed to speak with law enforcement. In sum and in substance and in relevant part, Hoberman admitted that she used several Kick accounts to upload images and videos depicting child pornography. Hoberman further stated that the email accounts, she goes on to list a variety of email accounts, and she stipulates that they all belong to her. Further, Hoberman admitted to uploading images and videos depicting child pornography onto the social media applications Kick, Telegram, Discord, and WhatsApp. Hoberman confirmed that she knew that it is illegal to possess and transmit child pornography, and she was concerned about being caught. Due to that consequence, she ultimately decided that she would delete some of that material. So, she has deleted accounts that she's used to upload child pornography. Hoberman also stated in some and in substance and in relevant part that she is sexually aroused and gratified by children, with a preference for children from infancy to age 3, and that she prefers violent depictions of the children in child pornography. Yeah. That's a female sexual predator, and those are apparently becoming more and more increasingly common as time goes on, because every time I open my computer, there's another female teacher who's having sex with a student. Hebephiles and ephebophiles, but of course Renee Hoberman, she's giving the men for a run for their money. She's going for infancy to age 3 in violent depictions of the children in child pornography. And what exactly are violent depictions of children in child pornography? Well, I'm sad you asked, because I honestly, reading this made me want to vomit. I can't imagine what hearing it is going to do to my audience members. But here on your screen, you'll see, additionally, during their initial review of the cell phone, officers observed several videos depicting child pornography saved in the hidden photos folder. Certain of these videos had previously been reported to NCMEC. That's a federal agency, I believe, that child sexual abuse material is identified and reported to. One such video is approximately 48 seconds long and depicts an infant female, approximately 1 year of age, fully naked, sitting on top of a fully naked adult male who is anally penetrating the child from behind with his penis, as the child cries and frantically screams for the duration of the video. Another video is approximately 1 minute and 52 seconds long and depicts an approximately 1 to 2 year old female lying on her back with her legs raised and knees bent, wide underwear rolled to the side, exposing the child's vagina and anus, the crowd crying and frantically screaming while being vaginally penetrated by the adult male's penis. The adult male then manipulates the child into a prone position where the child lies limp and virtually motionless as the adult male penetrates the child from behind with his penis. I have no fucking words for this. Now, what'll really, chap your ass about this case is Renee Hoberman was facing up to 20 years. Now, she's dead to rights. She's waived her Miranda rights. She is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. She's admitted the child sex material is hers. That she prefers 1 to 3 infants to 3 years of age engaged in violent sexual abuse or being violently sexually abused. And she got 7 years. Prosecutors were going for 12. She got 7. She was eligible for as many as 20, and the reality of it is, this is a woman who was working as a social worker with children for multiple employers, including a daycare. And these are her sexual proclivities and preferences, and you want to tell me that she only got 7 years in prison. And for people like Todd Wheeler, Senator Todd Wheeler of Woods Cross in Utah, she shouldn't be on a sex offender registry for the rest of her life. She shouldn't be facing a lifetime sex offender registry. She should have a second chance. Her victims, the kids she provided a demand for child sexual abuse material, where a 1-year-old was being anally raped by a grown man. Those children should just forgive and forget. Of course, that child has probably got a impacted colon and God knows what other kind of damage that's permanent. Because you can't penetrate a 1-year-old and expect to not permanently scar and injure them. And that's the kind of material that Renee Hoberman, Rena, likes to watch. That's what gets her where she needs to go. That's her preference. Infants to 3 years of age, violent child sexual abuse material. And they did not catch her, get her to admit to abusing children, but she put herself in proximity to children at multiple employers or at multiple jobs. And so the authorities probably aren't examining her patient load or her caseload at those employers, those children that she provided therapy and counseling to determine if she did in fact cross the line into abusing those children. That's what happened with David Lee Hamlin. He admitted to having sex with a couple of his adult female patients, but DOPL, the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing in Utah, they didn't bother to examine the rest of his caseload. If they had, they probably would have found children like Tobias Schroeder, the young man who is now the victim or the survivor in the Manti criminal case against Hamlin. That's the level. They don't do their due diligence to find out exactly what these people have done to children. They let it go. And when you talk about the victimization and the exploitation of children, there's a woman named Leigh Finke. She's a legislator in Minnesota. And she absolutely made an extraordinary statement over the past month or so. Like she's always made some outrageous statements, and I'm going to pull her up here in a second. You can see her in the upper left-hand corner of my screen. That's Leigh Finke. She's a transgender male to female. Man, she's not a she at all. She's a he. This guy who calls himself Leigh Finke, or Leigh Finke, Leigh. I've heard it pronounced both ways. This guy is elected. Well, he's not elected. He was appointed because he was trans. And so he was the first trans lawmaker in the state of Minnesota. And what did he say? What did he use his bully pulpit for in the state of Minnesota? What did he advocate for? If you guess the exposure of children to pornography, which again, that's ultimately in the first clip that we played for Dr. John DiMartini, he treated a Japanese pedophile, a Japanese child rapist, did 8 years in prison. At 8.5 years old, he was emulating his father, who was watching pornography, masturbating to it. He got caught by his mother masturbating, and his mother physically beat him, according to DiMartini, because she was so frustrated with the father's issues with pornography and sexual deviancy. Well, here's Leigh Finke arguing that children in Minnesota, queer children in Minnesota, should not have to circumvent or deal with age verification when it comes to accessing pornography online, because apparently viewing pornography, according to Leigh Finke, is a form of sexual education.
You mentioned the Paxton case, and the AGs in many states are very clear about that. They're almost jubilant about being able to use these laws to ban young people from accessing content that could be educational if they are queer. And you're a principal, you have LGBT students in your school, and we also know that they're not receiving sex education for queer kids. We know that prurient interest could be, for many people, the very existence of transgender kids. More and more people are saying there simply are no transgender kids.
Well, that's because there aren't transgender kids. That's because there aren't transgender kids. There are children who are being indoctrinated into gender dysphoria and transgenderism because there are billions of dollars at stake, because hormone treatment costs a lot of money. Reassignment surgery costs a lot of money. And if you can get insurers to cover it, and that is their policyholders who pay premiums for healthcare, actual healthcare, as opposed to elective cosmetic procedures, to where someone who believes that they're a transgender man or woman can feel like their body has been surgically mutilated enough to resemble their inner gender, whatever the hell that is. Yeah, there aren't transgender kids. There are kids with gender dysphoria. There's about 700,000 of them before it became a social contagion. About 80% of them would resolve their dysphoria by the time they were 18, and they would just realize that they were homosexual or gay. They had same-sex attraction. The other 20% would have persistent dysphoria into adulthood. And guess what? Still transgender kids. There are kids with gender dysphoria, which is a clinical condition, but they're not transgender kids. They're not kids that you or anybody else in the educational system should be talking to about gender identity. That's a matter between the parents, the child, and the psychologist or psychiatrist that the parents take their child to. It's the parents' decision how to handle it up to a point, and that is a lot of these parents, especially the liberal ones nowadays, look at having a transgender child as a form, it's almost a trophy in the progressive community. So let's play that clip again. Let's play that clip of Leigh Finke outlining her position on exposing children to pornography.
You mentioned the Paxton case, and the AGs in many states are very clear about that. They're almost jubilant about being able to use these laws to ban young people from accessing content that could be educational if they are queer. And you're a principal, you have LGBT students in your school, and we also know that they're not receiving sex education for queer kids. We know that prurient interest could be, for many people, the very existence of transgender kids. More and more people are saying there simply are no transgender kids.
Like, there are no transgender kids. There are children who have a clinical condition known as gender dysphoria. That is, they believe that their gender does not match their biological sex, and 80% of them with treatment will resolve by adulthood. They will recover from their gender dysphoria, which is a delusion. It's a psychiatric illness, and they will become men and women who, for whatever reason, are attracted to someone of the same sex they identify as gay. What Leigh Finke is opposing here in this clip are age verification laws. And she says that pornography, which these age verification laws are intended to block children from being able to access, is somehow educational for queer kids who aren't receiving sexual education for queer kids. That is, queer kids need a separate form of sexual education than cisgender kids, I believe is what they call it. Queer kids need their own specialized form of sexual education. And yes, online pornography, according to Lee Finke, might fit the bill, even though Dr. John DeMartini talks about his Japanese pedophile client or patient being exposed to pornography from the time he was at least 8.5, and being caught by his mother masturbating and growing up to have sex with 8.5-year-old Japanese girls at the mall. This is what we're up against. And Lee Finke was never elected to office. Lee Finke was appointed to office because she was herself a transgender trophy. Like, that's the level at which we're at in this country. We actually have to take somebody seriously. Somebody's appointed to a position of power for no other reason than the fact that they identify as transgender. They're mentally ill. And they're appointed to public office where they have an influence over the laws and the public policies of their state and can influence outcomes as to whether or not children have access to online pornography or whether or not they have to go to an age verification process that is designed to prevent children from being exposed to online pornography. What is the average age of a child's first exposure to pornography in this country? It's 10. 10 years of age. 10 years of age. So, as you consider that, you consider what's going on with Renee Holberman, you consider what's going on with John DeMartini, you consider what's going on with Lee Finke, one of the things that you're going to see here is all three of these examples from the Freakin Weekend, this episode, center in some way around pornography. Renee Holberman preferred pornography depicting children as young as infants all the way up to 3 years of age being violently sexually abused and assaulted. John DeMartini, that 8.5-year-old boy, his father was a porn addict. The mother was frustrated with the father and physically abused the son, who grew up to be a Japanese child rapist who did 8 years in prison for sexually molesting, for raping and having sex with 8.5-year-old girls. That's the level. So, as we get into our next segment, it's about a guy named Phil Bussey. And so what I want you to understand about Phil Bussey is this is Phil and Kathy Bussey. He's now what is called an Area 70 in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And prior to that, he was a mission president at the LDS mission in Madrid, Spain. He's been the subject of civil litigation, he and his wife both, because their adopted son, Peyton, who attended their mission residence along with the rest of the family over Christmas break one year, apparently molested his nephew, a kid whose name has been abbreviated in court documents to HB. He began sexually molesting him in Madrid. That continued until recently. And HB's parents, Brandon and Heidi, sued Phil and Kathy Bussey and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in a sex trafficking lawsuit because the church allegedly paid for all of the airfare, and the church knew prior to this that Peyton Bussey, the adopted son of Phil and Kathy here, had been convicted as a teenager for sexually abusing a 6-year-old at a swim meet and elsewhere. And so I want you to have an idea of what Phil and Kathy Bussey are capable of. I want to take this down. I want to put their letter up, which is in part of the case files that I found. We met with an attorney the other day to go over the legal issues. He will be turning it into the prosecutor this week. Payton is paying a huge price, as you should when you sexually abuse a 6-year-old. And for that reason, we are going to call the powers of Heavenly Father. They're asking that miracles will take place in his sentencing and that Payton will not pay a bigger price than necessary. I can't even wrap my head around this. What's absent from these filings, and this is something that Justin Riggs, who I've had on here, pointed out, is any mention of the victim who is the grandson of Phil and Kathy Bussey. Their grandson is the victim here. Turns out that Payton allegedly also molested HB's sister during visits to his his brother and sister-in-law's home in Utah. Payton Bussey is currently incarcerated in Utah County. He's facing 2 pending criminal cases for sexually abusing children in Utah and Washington State. He's also facing a federal criminal case for possessing child sexual abuse material. It's 3 criminal cases. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and his bishop ordained Payton Bussey after his first conviction for sexually abusing a 6-year-old. They ordained him into the priesthood. He was shipped off to Mount Pleasant in Utah, which is where his mother, Kathy Bussey, is from. He was sent to graduate from Wasatch Academy, which is the same private boarding school in San Pete County that alleged members of the Church of Satan, that is, Latter-day Saints who are part of the Church of Satan, sent their children to, and where a faculty member named Alessa Wolf, who is allegedly a member of the Church of Satan, participated in their abuse and ordinances in the 90s, is still the English teacher. That's the level. They didn't want him to pay a price that was bigger than necessary, and as a result, their grandson was molested. Their granddaughter was possibly molested. Now, one of the other things that the Busseys did was, before all of this happened, they gave their children, or their child Brandon, their son Brandon, and his wife Heidi, a bridge loan of $190,000 to buy their home. The Busseys filed a counterclaim when Brandon and Heidi sued them for the sexual abuse that Payton inflicted on their son over a number of years. They filed a counterclaim against them demanding immediate repayment of the loan, which they had forgiven $40,000 or so in principal. And Brandon and Heidi were only able to come up with $10,000. As a result, it compelled Brandon and Heidi to settle the case out of court. The counterclaim was dismissed. It was dropped by Phil and Kathy Bussey. And, of course, Brandon and Heidi dismissed their suit against Phil and Kathy. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints tried to transfer the case out of the Western District of Washington to the Utah District Court, which coincidentally is the same district court where the Hamlin sisters That is, Katie Baxter and Miriam Amblin have filed their Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act lawsuit against the church and 7 other named defendants, including their father and mother, Brian Capener, an LDS filmmaker, David Levitt, the former county attorney for both Utah County and Juab County, Gordon Bowen, the creative chairman of Dentsu Aegis, formerly Dentsu McGarry Bowen. They filed it against 108 defendants in total. That is 8 named defendants and those 1 through 100 defendants. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for obvious reasons, wanted that case to be transferred. They wanted the Bussey case to be transferred to the Utah District Court. And their move to do so was denied. Brandon and Heidi Bussey have moved across the country. They have relocated. It appears that their relationship with their parents is forever severed because their parents have chosen to back their child rapist of a son, Peyton Bussey, through his 3 criminal cases. Peyton Bussey is the only one listed on Phil Bussey's Facebook page as a family member. Brandon and his sister are not listed as Phil Bussey's family members, on Facebook at least. So as we look at this and we say to ourselves, what is Peyton Bussey being busted for at the federal level? Child sexual abuse material, child porn. So the Freakin Weekend would like you to understand pornography is not harmless. Do you think Peyton Bussey, who was adopted from Russia at under 2 years of age, learned this behavior from someone in Russia when he was under 2 years of age, or did he learn this behavior in the United States? But he was exposed to pornographic material just like the individual in the first clip that we played with Dr. John DeMartini and his appearance on the Aubrey Marcus podcast. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They just don't. And with the subject of our next advertisement, Gordon Bowen, doesn't happen in a vacuum. Gordon Bowen told others, his co-workers at various advertising agencies, his college peers, that he had been sexually abused as a child by a family friend while his father, Wes Bowen, watched. So Gordon Bowen alleged that his father watched him be sexually assaulted by a family friend. And here's Gordon Bowen, the alleged Church of Satan punisher who allegedly raped multiple children, trafficked children from Utah to New York, and whose ex-secretary Michelle Avantario told his estranged wife, Barbara Timothy, she was worried that the police were going to find the bodies of dead boys in Bowen's yard. Without further ado, I'll give you a look at our next advertisement, because it illustrates the connections, the corruption at heart here, because Gordon Bowen is still, even though he was excommunicated in 2003, he is still retained by the church to perform church work. He's listed as the creative director of the Salt Lake City Temple reopening. It's being remodeled. But when it reopens, Gordon Bowen, excommunicated homosexual man, alleged pedophile and murderer, alleged Church of Satan punisher, will be the creative director overseeing that reopening for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Without further ado, I give you Pickleballin' with Gordon Bowen.
We'd like to invite all you Buy Bottom boys to pickleballing at Gordon Bowen's home in Holiday, Utah. Meet LDS apostles who associate with Gordon Bowen, creative director of advertising agency Dentsu McGarry Bowen, and play pickleball with alleged Satanist and creative director of the Salt Lake City Temple reopening, Gordon Bowen. Gordon doesn't let a little Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act lawsuit upend his life, and neither do LDS apostles like Garrett Walter Gong. Do it up with us, the Bottom Boys of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and go pickleballing with Gordon Bowen, the excommunicated Latter-day Saint who somehow still gets church business, funded by your tithing. Remember, in the alleged words of Gordon, all the abuse is satanic, but ritual abuse is greater in power and potency.
That's right, people. It's greater in power and potency. And what I want you to understand here is that if you read the Gordon Bowen divorce documents that are available on investigationsandritualabuse.com, one of the allegations from one of Gordon's former girlfriends is that she found gay porn in his New York City residence. She confronted him about it. His stepsons, Colin and Eric, alleged that they had found gay porn on Gordon Bowen's computer in their homes that they shared with him, in the residences that they shared with him in Utah, New York, and Boston. The phone records from Bowen's divorce detail that he made thousands of phone calls over a period of months to gay male escort services. Now, Bowen says that he was getting massages. Most of us would call a professional massage therapist or a masseuse and schedule an appointment in a spa to go get a massage. Not Gordon Bowen. He called gay male escort lines thousands of times. He was fired repeatedly for his out-of-control sexual dalliances. His co-workers alleged that he sexually assaulted them while sharing a bed with them on business trips. They would wake up and find Gordon fondling them in their sleep. That's the level here. That's the person the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has as the creative director overseeing the opening of the Salt Lake City Temple, a man who was excommunicated from that same church in 2003 and has made no attempt to be rebaptized or to show repentance. It's where your tithing money is going, is paying Gordon Bowen to oversee that reopening. He's allegedly the individual who oversaw the redesign of the church's logo. Various church apostles either rent out his home and holiday for church functions like Dieter Dorf's recent birthday, or they attend his social soirees, his dinner parties. And of course, Garrett Walter Gong is his associate and friend. Garrett Walter Gong's mother, Jean Feng Char, was close associates with the grandmother, was a close associate, a sister by affection, according to the obituary of Karma DeYoung Anderson and her sisters Belle Felice and Nola DeYoung. She met Nola probably at the Burlingame Ward in California, which met in the Scottish Rite Temple. She was invited to live at the DeYoung household in Provo when she attended college. That's Jean Feng Char, Garrett Walter Gong's mother. Karma DeYoung Anderson and Richard Lloyd Anderson are the grandparents on the maternal side of Rachel, Eliza, Catherine, and Miriam Hamlin, who are the central victims over at Investigations of Racial Abuse, which focuses almost exclusively on the David Lee Hamlin case. And Garrett Walter Gong, apostle for the LDS Church, plays pickleball with Gordon Bowen, according to multiple sources. Goes to his home in Holiday, Utah, frequently. Garrett Walter Gong's son, Matthew, is a polyamorous queer Mormon by his own admission, his own That's what he professes to be, polyamorous, queer, and Mormon. The Mormon part of it is something that he kind of vacillates on, but over the years, his claim to fame is that he is Garrett Walter Gong's gay son, or queer son. And so the official doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very LGBTQIA unfriendly, but the actual practice on the ground is very LGBTQIA friendly, because you have individuals like the former mascot at BYU, the former Cosmo the Cougar. His name is Charlie Bird. He's married to a man. He and his husbands both have callings in their ward. He and his husband, even though they are in flagrant breach of the church's law of chastity, the church's doctrine, when it comes to sexual purity and sexual chastity in marriage, even though they're in flagrant disobedience to that, they're still members in good standing, and they still have church callings. For biological Latter-day Saint females, the rub is that they have to wait outside the restroom now, according to official church guidance, when a man dressed as a woman who professes to be a woman is using the women's restroom. That door is guarded by someone of like mind who is sympathetic to the transgender delusion, and biological Latter-day Saint females, cisgender as they call them, females, have to wait outside to relieve themselves, while a man avails himself of the women's restroom. That's where we're at. That's exactly what's going on in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of all places. Samuel Lamanite in the comments has said Mitt Romney's sons lived with Bowen while serving an internship. Actually, that is true. Two of Mitt Romney's sons did stay with Gordon Bowen in his New York apartment. Mitt Romney has had a 30-year-long friendship with Gordon Bowen. He was present in the 90s at Bowen's temple wedding with Barbara Timothy. Later Barbara Bowen, obviously. But of course, Barbara Boyce, that's her maiden name, knew Gordon Bowen from their time in high school. She married Steve Timothy, a veterinarian, had 3 sons with him. She later had 2 children with Gordon Bowen, and according to Justin Riggs of LDS Abuse, who was able to procure some additional documents, Gordon Bowen in his journal wrote that all of the sexual abuse was satanic, but that ritual abuse was greater in power and potency. That particular journal excerpt is apparently unavailable at the University of Utah's archives of Lynn Packer's papers. Lynn Packer is the legendary Utah journalist who worked as a consultant on multiple divorces, including both the divorce of David Lee Hamblin and the divorce of Barbara Bowen, a.k.a. Barbara Timothy, a.k.a. Barbara Boyce. Another wonderful coincidence is that Barbara's first attorney was H. Russell Hedinger, who just so happened to be the same divorce attorney retained by Roselle Stevenson in her divorce from David Lee Hamblin. So many coincidences, so many connections, and they can't mean anything. It's all a giant conspiracy. It's all satanic panic. It's all bullshit, according to the mainline or the mainstream in Utah. And of course, we know that it isn't. And IRA has been dedicated to proving that for close to 4 years now, and I think we've done a pretty good job of sourcing it from primary source documents, more so than anybody else out there. we've done a good job of proving that the allegations against David Lee Hamblin in the Hamlin victim statements and the various police reports and DCFS reports and the court documents that we've been able to source over the past 4 years, those allegations are more likely true than false. And the allegations against Hamlin's alleged accomplices in the Church of Satan, a.k.a. the group, are also likely true. This has been the Freakin' Weekend with AntiTribe. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already on our YouTube channel. We need to get to 1,000 subscribers before we can monetize the channel. If you do so, send a screenshot of that subscription to me at 1830GOEL@gmail.com, and I will give you a free year subscription to Investigations in Ritual Abuse, which would normally cost you $120 a year. If you make a $100 donation to Relentless Hope, which is the nonprofit servicing ritual abuse survivors and sex trafficking victims, that'll get you a year subscription to IRA as well. You can go to Relentless Hope, their website. It's up on IRA and recent articles that we've written. That $100 will buy a session of therapy at a discounted rate from many of our therapists. It'll buy services like EMDR and neural feedback, both of which have shown extreme promise in helping ritual abuse survivors heal and process what happened to them. This is Goel with Investigations of Ritual Abuse, AntiTribe, Government Sex Predators, Fringe Concerns, and Church Predators, saying good night on Sunday. We've been going for about an hour and a half. I want it to be kind of abbreviated as opposed to ranting the way that I normally do. Thanks for tolerating that. And so without further ado, we'll go to the end credits. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And thank you for supporting us at IRA and AntiTribe and our affiliated sites. Thank you.